Last week when we finished up, I told you that I was working on a handout. So I'm going to, if you want to, I didn't even think about that, to hand these out before. You can keep those over there. The physical impact of emotions, which I just now see as misspelled, but that's okay. Emotions on our bodies. And thinking about this in the context of what we've talked about over the last couple of months about the importance of our words and the importance of knowing who we are in Christ and the importance of the authority that we have over our thought life and over our lives and over the choices we make. We can't ignore, and I think it's really important that we make this specific connection between how we think, which determines how we feel, and so the connection between the emotions that we have and our physical health, because there's a direct connection. Now what I've done is I've gone through just looking at what emotions are generally recognized as affecting which parts of our body, both inside and out, but mostly inside in this handout, and then just some scriptural examples of that. So we'll start out, we'll just work our way down through here, and then I'm going to talk a little bit more this evening about our thought lives and our self-talk. And I'll probably wrap up this evening with what we've been studying, and I haven't really decided yet where we're going to go next. But if you all have something particular in mind that you'd like to study, just be thinking about that before we get to the end of the evening and let me know. We can do the life of somebody, or we can do a particular subject or a book. Of Scripture, or a book of the Bible. So anger affects the liver and the gallbladder. And I just found it really interesting that there are specific emotions that seem to attack particular organs in our bodies. Anger is an emotion associated with high irritation levels, resentment, frustration, and rage. Now that would be, of course, sinful anger, not righteous anger, and there's a difference between the two. The liver and gallbladder produce and store bile. Anger affects many biological processes that sap energy and cause headaches, dizziness, high blood pressure, itchy skin, skin conditions, sluggishness, and low energy. So that's the effect that we see when we live angry. There's just this ongoing anger. So Job 30, verses 21 and 22, and then verse 30. Job says to God in his confusion and anger, "You have become cruel to me." Now we know that's not true about God, but that's how Job felt at the moment. "With the might of your hand you persecute me. You lift me up to the wind and cause me to ride. You dissolve me in a storm." And here's the connection. "My skin turns black on me, and my bones burn with fever." So Job's resentment toward God, coupled with his great sorrow, and we're going to see in a little bit what grief does. But I just can't even imagine his depth of grief. I mean, it's hard enough to lose everything you own, which he did in a very short time. But all 10 of his children died. And we read that they were adults, and they were all gathered together in one house. They had to have spouses and children. And so I'm assuming that there were not only children who died there, but children-in-law and grandchildren. And the depth of his grief must have been indescribable. So his frustration here and not understanding, we have the advantage of hindsight as we look back at Scripture and see that Satan approached God and said, "Let me have him." And so Satan was the one who caused the destruction, not God. But Job didn't know that. This one I found to be really interesting. Refusal to communicate emotions affects the throat. The body's main organ of communication is the throat, obviously. An inability, and that may come because of fear or intimidation or shyness or all of those things, an inability to speak what we believe is true about our situation may cause physical problems with the throat. In extreme cases, one may even become unable to speak. And we've all read examples of people who, because of a great trauma, became mute and were unable to make a sound when the speech organs themselves were uninjured. The throat is also the upper end of the digestive tract. Acute emotional tensions and anxieties agitate the liver, and we just read that, causing it to rise and get bottlenecked in the throat. It may cause the feeling of choking on something. A gush of emotion, especially sadness, grief, or intense sentimentality, will also cause a lump in the throat. How often have we used that phrase? Stuffing or swallowing emotions is injurious to throat health, causing vulnerability to dysfunction and disease. So there's a specific connection to emotions with how healthy our throats and that whole mechanism is. Daniel 10:13 through 16. Then Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me after I had been left there with the kings of Persia. Now remember, the kings of Persia were not human beings, they were angelic beings. So you can imagine the emotion Daniel has here. Now I have come to help you understand what will happen to your people in the last days, for the vision refers to those days. While he was saying these words to me, I turned my face toward the ground and became speechless. He was in such awe of the beings that stood there that he found it impossible to speak. Now the next one is a little longer, but it's one that I think we deal with a lot. Grief affects the lungs. Grief is an emotion that can cause disharmony in the lungs, tightening the chest and causing shallow breathing. I've heard statistics on, and I don't know why we Americans don't take deep breaths, but that one of the problems that we struggle with, or one of the problems that we deal with, is not enough oxygen because we breathe very shallow breaths. This results in diseases such as recurring bronchitis, asthma, and asthma is an epidemic in our culture right now. Pain in the chest, shoulder and back, constant cough, dry mouth, and hoarseness. The lungs work closely with the heart. The heart and lungs are vulnerable to many of the same emotional states. The lungs need a feeling of space in which to function, giving rise to the phrase breathing room. I was kind of amazed and surprised at how, as I was writing this out, how much of our figures of speech indicate this emotional connection between, or this connection between our emotions and our organs. The feeling of being smothered, invalidated, or denied one's space constricts the lungs. Conversely, a feeling of dignity and pride puffs up the chest. It does, doesn't it? People that are confident and sometimes prideful and arrogant, which is not good. But, boy, their shoulders are back, their chest is out, and they walk through life with purpose. Negative puffs up the chest and allows the lungs to expand and function properly. Negative emotions that sap the will to live are also injurious to the lungs, especially grief and bereavement. Many chronic respiratory diseases such as chronic bronchitis, asthma, constant coughing, dry mouth, and hoarseness develop after a major loss or bereavement. And we can all think of people who became very ill following a loss of some sort. My brother-in-law passed away 4 years ago, and it was in the fall. He died in June. In about August or September, his twin sister was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, and she only lived about 6 weeks after she was diagnosed. So they died the same year. And I thought of her when I was reading this and how grief impacts the lungs. Although we usually think of grief as having to do with the loss of a loved one or something highly valued like a job, grief can take less recognizable forms. Some common underlying sources of grief are mourning, for example, one's lost childhood or lost innocence. That happens a lot of times with men or women who were forced because of some circumstance to just grow up far too quickly. Lost opportunities or mourning the loss of good health. When we have this expectation that when we don't have to work 60 or 70 hours a week anymore, we're going to be able to do, and we have these plans, and then before we're able to carry those out, some loss of health makes that impossible. There's grief involved with that. It's possible to hold grief for something never actually possessed, but longed for. I think that's a very important statement. So grief can affect those who carry it in several ways. Now, I've often talked to people about the 3 hearts that we have. We have a spiritual heart, and that's the heart we refer to when we say Jesus came to live in my heart. He comes to occupy our spirit person. We have an emotional heart. That's the heart that we refer to when we say, oh, my heart just longs for that. And then we have a physical heart, which we all are aware of because we feel it beating in our bodies every day. So grief can cause the emotional heart to shut down and just withdraw from life. We're on page 2. That has a negative impact on relationships. Deep internal sadness that is not dealt with and healed prevents empathetic connections with other people. It prevents us from reaching out to others because we're trying to guard ourselves. We don't want to get involved with something that reminds us of a hurt that we've experienced. It also reduces the capacity to enjoy life and results in depression, which robs motivation and well-being. Deeply depressed people are pretty much incapacitated physically very often. Many feel grief, and notice the connection with the lungs here, as heaviness in the chest. How many of you have been around somebody who just about blows you away with their sighs? Just every little bit there's a and you just think, what? That is an expression of grief and feelings of deadness a heaviness right here in the heart and lung region. Other signs can be painful, tight, inflexible ribs. We talked about having a lump in the throat. And then here's one, shoulders hunched over protectively. I thought this was interesting, that when people are bent like that, they are often unconsciously trying to protect the heart. Made sense to me. This results in postural changes as well. Frequent lung problems can be traced to stored or grief that has not been dealt with. And I think it's important that what we brought out here, that grief is not just a loss of something. Grief can be something that you longed for and never experienced, and you grieve over having never experienced it. So grief then can take a lot of forms. Isaiah 35:10 says this, "The ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing, and everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness," and look at the connection here, "sorrow and sighing shall flee away." Job 17:7, Job says, "My eye has grown dim because of grief, and all my members are wasting away like a shadow." All of his members, inside and out. He just feels himself withering away because of grief. Psalm 31:9-13, "Be gracious to me, O Lord, for I am in distress. My eye is wasted away from grief." Again, my eye. What is the eye? Why is this reference to the eye and grief? It's not a commonly used phrase. In Matthew, Jesus talks about the eye being the lamp of the body. And if the eye is dark, how great is the dark on the inside? I think that has to do with our eyes looking out upon life with either hope and a sense of anticipation, which brings light into the whole body, or our eyes looking out upon life with a sense of hopelessness and despair. And then how dark is the darkness on the inside. And the idea, I think, here is that there is no light and that the eye is wasting away. The grief is so heavy. My soul and my body also. For my life is spent with sorrow. And look again, my years with sighing. My strength has failed me because of my iniquity, and my body has wasted away. Because of all my adversaries, I have become a reproach, especially to my neighbors, and an object of dread to my acquaintances. Those who see me in the secret flee from me. I am forgotten as a dead man, out of mind. I am like a broken vessel, for I have heard the slander of many, and terror is on every side. While they took counsel together against me, they schemed to take away my life. David is writing this in the despair of Ahithophel and his son Absalom trying to take over his throne, and in the grief of having lost his dearest friend and his favorite son. He just expresses this great grief, this great sorrow. But the sorrow and the sighing are always tied together. Psalm 22 is written prophetically of the crucifixion of Jesus on the cross. And so these are words written that Jesus would later express. The very first words of this psalm, Psalm 22:1, is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" That's what Jesus was quoting as he hung there on the cross. Now, we've heard years and years of teaching about, well, Jesus said God had forsaken him, so that means God turned his back on Jesus. And then we hear that justified by, he did that so he'd never have to turn his back on us. Okay, you know what? That does not comfort me. If God would turn his back on Jesus, then how am I to believe he would never turn his back on me, right? So I don't have this here, but I think I'm going to look it up and read the rest of it to you. But I'm going to read this part of Psalm 22. As Jesus says, "Be not far from me, for trouble is near, and there is none to help. Many foes like bulls have surrounded me. Strong bulls of Bashan have hedged me in. Against me they opened their mouths wide like a ravening and roaring lion. I am poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax. It is softened with anguish and melted down within me. My strength is dried up like a fragment of clay pottery. With thirst my tongue cleaves to my jaws. You have brought me into the dust of death. For like a pack of dogs they have surrounded me. A company of evildoers has encircled me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones, and the evildoers gaze at me." Just such incredible despair there. I want to read the part of this psalm that shows us that God did not forsake Jesus there on the cross. What Jesus was doing as he hung there and cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" is what we would do if I said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Now, what happens when I say that sentence? You've kind of gone on with Psalm 23, haven't you? Because you know that psalm. Well, Jesus knew that those surrounding him also knew that psalm. And he's quoting a part of it, although he didn't quote the whole thing. We've picked up on that and made what I believe is really a wrong teaching out of it. Let's see. I want to go to verse 20. "Deliver my life from the sword, my dear life, my only one, from the power of the dog, that agent of execution. Save me from the lion's mouth, for you have answered me from the horns of the wild oxen." Now here's the part that helps me to understand that even though Jesus felt forsaken, God never left him. "I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the congregation I will praise you. You who fear, revere, and worship the Lord, praise him. All you offspring of Jacob, glorify him. Fear and worship him, all you offspring of Israel. For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the affliction, nor has he hidden his face from him." Isn't that amazing? "But when he cried to him, he heard. My praise shall be of you in the great congregation. I will pay him my vows made in the time of trouble before them who fear, revere, and worship him. The poor and afflicted shall eat and be satisfied. They shall praise the Lord, they who diligently seek and inquire him as their greatest need." But I'm going to go back and I'm going to reread those two verses. That one verse, verse 24. "For he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, neither has he hidden his face from him, but when he cried to him, he heard." Great comfort in that. But the emotional pressure that Jesus was under at that point in his humanity, he did what we often do. We cry out how we feel, even though we may know that how we feel at that moment is not the truth. Cowardice, timidity, guilt, remorse, deceit, and duplicity weaken the heart, which is very sensitive to emotional states. The heart and the digestive system. I've heard people describe the gut, the digestive system, as the first brain. Our emotional stuff is going to show up in our gut before it shows up in our brain. And it's going to affect our digestive system and our heart, first of all. It is no surprise, it is no wonder to me that heart disease is the number one killer in our culture, and that cancer is close behind, because our emotional state creates an atmosphere, an internal atmosphere that destroys the heart and gives cancer every opportunity to grow. Uplifting emotions like courage, valor, honesty, forthrightness, altruism, and compassion strengthen the heart. Well, then I want to develop those, because that gives us good heart health. Love and the emotional will to live are also very important to the heart. It is certainly possible to die of a broken heart. That would be grief. Psalm 6, verses 2 and 3, "Be gracious to me, Lord, for I am weak. Heal me, Lord, for my bones are shaking. My whole being is shaken with terror." Where do we feel that quivering first when we're terrified of something? Right in here, don't we? I went and looked up, some of these are quoted from the King James Version because it correctly uses the word bowels. Our inward, our inner stuff. Psalm 28, verses 7 through 8, "The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart rejoices." Why? I've been helped, and now I have hope. My heart rejoices, and I praise him with my song. The Lord is the strength of his people. He is the stronghold of salvation for his anointed. So now we're going to get to the gut. We're going to get to the digestive system. Worry, anxiety, and pensiveness affect the stomach. Emotions like anger, hate, rage, resentment, and frustration stored in the stomach leads to gastritis and ulcers by lowering the stomach's digestive ability. Now, added to that is the fact that we gulp down our food without chewing because we're always in a hurry, and we gulp down the wrong stuff. Our poor stomachs, bless their hearts, they've just got a massive job to do because we don't help them out a lot. I was telling somebody the other day who was making fun of my morning shake because it's green. And I purposely put it in a container that nobody can see what color it is because I just don't want to hear the comments. But I said, okay, I'm just going to say this about my shake. My morning shake has more nutrition in it than more people probably get in 3 or 4 days. Literally. And because I put it in my Vitamix blender, and this is not a commercial, but it breaks that food down like chewing should, so that by the time I sit and I sip that shake, my stomach doesn't have a lot of work to do, and it can just absorb the nutrients from that shake. We just need to give our insides the best opportunity to be healthy. And what we eat and how we eat it is a big part of that. This reduced hydrochloric acid production results in bloating, gas, colic, changes in bowel habits, and a thinned gut lining, which leads to gastritis and ulcers. The anxious worrier often suffers from ulcerative colitis, which is an inflammation of the large intestine, and is very painful. It's dangerous. If accumulated emotional tensions in the stomach become very severe, anorexia, appetite disorders, giddiness, nausea, and dry heaves will result. Job 33:19-20, we see an expression of how Job was so disordered in his gut from the tension and the anxiety and the sorrow. He says, a person may be disciplined on his bed with pain and constant distress in his bones, so that he detests bread, and his soul despises his favorite food. No appetite. I liked the Message paraphrase of Jeremiah 4:19. I am doubled up with cramps in my belly. A poker burns in my gut. My insides are tearing me up. There's never a moment's peace. And it was because he was so stressed and anxious over the condition of God's people. Stress affects the heart and the brain, producing anxiety disorders. I put that in quotes on purpose. Anxiety problems, heart palpitations, insomnia, muscle cramps, and brain fog. You ever been so stressed that you just couldn't think? We've all been there on some level. Kids who have trouble taking tests. That's the problem. They get so anxious and pressured by that test that everything that they've learned over the last month is just like they can't bring it into their memory bank. The brain is often affected by fluid and metabolic imbalances that arise elsewhere in the body and influence how it functions. The brain is not all effect. It can also be cause. So there's an interaction between the brain and the body, because the kinds of thoughts we habitually think have a profound impact on the heart, both negative and positive. If we want a strong, healthy heart, how we think is imperative. Thinking positively, thinking thoughts that are just continually bringing God to the forefront of our mind is imperative to a healthy heart. Lamentations 3:17-19 from the Amplified Version. I have forgotten what good and happiness are, and I say, perished is my strength and my expectation from the Lord. Okay, if we have no strength and no expectation from the Lord, what are we? Hopeless. Perished. My good expectations are gone. They're gone. They've passed away. Oh Lord, remember earnestly my affliction and my misery, my wandering and my outcast state, the wormwood and the gall. But I included that because it says, I have forgotten. I mean, it was so difficult and so hard for him that he couldn't even remember any longer the good times. Fear affects the kidneys and becomes evident as chronic adrenal fatigue. This one and the next one kind of go together. A tired but wired feeling, you're just exhausted but you can't relax. That kind of feeling. frequent urination and UTIs, urinary tract infections, back pain, insomnia due to the inability to just let go, feeling unsafe and unprotected. Extreme fear may cause a person to spontaneously lose control of kidney and bladder function. Fright, fear, and shock are most injurious to the kidneys. When beset or attacked with extreme fear or fright, many lose control of their kidneys and bladder and urinate spontaneously. Somebody all along the way has a story of being a little kid and being in front of a bunch of people and just being so nervous and so upset that they wet themselves. And that's the connection there. Excessive stress, worry, and anxiety hinder effective energy use by injuring and draining the adrenal glands. Now, we have a thing in our culture called chronic fatigue syndrome. And it is a situation in which the adrenal system is just exhausted. It cannot any longer produce adrenaline, and if we don't have adrenaline, we're not getting off the couch. Adrenaline, and part of what exhausts our adrenal system is the use of caffeine. Here's how caffeine works. Caffeine is a very mild drug, but it is a stimulant. It stimulates the adrenal glands to produce more adrenaline. And so when you take too much, you get that shaky, wired feeling. But an overuse of caffeine and keeping the adrenal system constantly stimulated, if we are not feeding our adrenal system what it needs to recoup itself, it just runs out. And somewhere along the way, there is exhaustion. The fight or flight adrenaline response is made excessive by acute stress and emotional outbursts of anger, where life has become a dramatized emotional roller coaster, where there's just always drama that you've got to deal with. And some people get so used to drama as children, and they grow up in a very agitated atmosphere, that as they grow up, they're going to create drama because that's what feels normal to them. And so life is just one crisis after another, constant. Chronic stress of the adrenal cortical hormones like cortisol can lead to weight gain, especially in the lower body and midriff, as well as rising blood sugar if the stress is constant and unresolved. And so when that stress is constant, it begins to create an overweight problem. I mean, do you see how the emotional excesses we live with in our culture contributes to some of the stuff we've got going on? I am just amazed at the number of people whose entertainment of choice is the next action movie, horror movie, fright movie, murder mystery. I don't even like to wait to the end of the ball game to know who's going to win. I don't like that suspense. I just do not want to be under that kind of excessive emotional pressure all the time. I think people get an adrenal buzz from that. But guess what? After a while, the kind that you saw last week, it's like porn. It's violence porn. What you saw last week is not going to be enough to stimulate that adrenaline rush this week, and so you've got to see more violence. And it just continues to escalate. Since the adrenal glands provide the energetic support for healthy urinary function, the health, vitality, and functioning of the kidneys will also be drained, and adversely affected by weakened or challenged adrenals. The adrenal glands sit directly on top of the kidneys, right back here. So they are very closely connected. Psalm 38, 5 through 6. Because of my foolishness, I am bent over. There's that expression of bending down. And brought low. All day I go around in mourning. My heart races, my strength leaves me, and even the light of my eyes has faded. Are we seeing kind of a common theme here? Pretty amazing, isn't it? Pensiveness affects the spleen. Excessive deep introspection, which often becomes circular thinking. You know, just kind of like the little gerbil on the wheel. There's no place to get off. You start and you go around through the same kind of thinking, and you can come to the same conclusion, and then you start at the beginning again, and you just don't ever, there's never an ending place of that particular kind of thinking. The spleen is the storage receptacle for black bile. Anxiety, worry, and depression constrict the flow of bile through the digestive system. So when we get anxious and upset and the spleen's not working correctly, it affects our digestive system because we don't have flowing into our digestive system what it needs to digest what we're eating. Anxiety, worry, and causing colic, gas, distension, and bloating throughout the entire abdominal area. Since the balanced, proper action of black bile is important to proper colon function, the colon is very vulnerable to aggravations and excesses of negative emotions, especially chronic or deeply held worry, anxiety, nervous or emotional stress, and tension. Security issues, deep insecurities will impact the colon negatively. These emotional disturbances usually produce disorders like constipation, irritable bowel syndrome, or spastic colon. But if the aggravation is severe, colitis and more serious degenerative diseases may result. Isn't that amazing? Lamentations. And again, I've used the Message paraphrase here. Lamentations 1, 19 through 22, Jeremiah is lamenting, which is why this book is called Lamentations, lamenting over the condition of Israel. I called to my friends, they betrayed me. My priests and my leaders only looked after themselves, trying but failing to save their own skins. I was reading this thinking, how current does that sound? Oh God, look at the trouble I'm in. My stomach is in knots, my heart wrecked by a life of rebellion. There are massacres in the streets, starvation in the houses. Oh, listen to my groans. No one listens and no one cares. When my enemies heard of the trouble you gave me, they cheered. Bring on Judgment Day. Let them get what I got. Now he's got some resentment and bitterness and go get them, God, kind of thinking going here. Take a good look at their evil ways and give it to them. Give them what you gave me for my sins. Groaning in pain, body and soul, I've had all I can take. Hopelessness, giving up. Emotionally induced digestive disorders affect the intestines and the bowels. The intestines often affect the upper digestive organs, the liver, gallbladder, stomach, and spleen. So we've talked about that a little bit. The upper small intestine, or duodenum, being very close to these upper digestive organs, is the part most affected. Emotional disturbances are most injurious in the middle and lower intestinal tract, producing colic and kinks or obstructions, bowel obstructions in the intestines, which can be deadly very quickly. Job 30, 25 through 28, and this is from the King James. Did I not weep for him that was in trouble? Job is protesting his righteousness here. Was not my soul grieved for the poor? When I looked for good, then evil came to me, and when I waited for light, there came darkness. My bowels boiled and rested not. The days of affliction prevented me. I went mourning without the sun. I thought that was a great phrase. My bowels boiled. Just a constant disturbance in there. Feelings of fear, inadequacy, insecurity, or performance anxiety, what I talked about testing there, when kids take tests, which often operate on a subliminal, or it's a level that we're not even aware of because it feels so normal to us, have a powerful impact on male reproductive organs. Since the male reproductive organs are closely linked both functionally and anatomically to the kidneys and urinary tract, negative emotions that adversely affect the kidneys, like fear, fright, shock, and anxiety, will adversely affect male sexual function as well. Male impotence or sexual dysfunction doesn't always have a physical cause. It can be emotionally caused. There may also be incontinence of sperm or premature ejaculation. Since the adrenal glands primarily, the adrenal response provides the energetic support for both urinary and sexual function. In the male, men who don't live a balanced, well-regulated emotional life and drain their adrenal energy will also find their sexual performance suffers. It's one of the objections that I have over and over again. You guys have heard me gripe about the Viagra flood in our culture. It doesn't deal with the underlying issues. And that can be, long-term, far more destructive. Psalm 38, 3-7. David is still mourning the loss here of his friend and his son. There is no health in my bones because of my sin. Now this, I take that back. This he's writing after his sin with Bathsheba. For my sins have flooded over my head. They are a burden too heavy for me to bear. My wounds are foul and festering because of my foolishness. I am bent over and brought low. All day long I go around in mourning. My loins are full of burning pain. There is no health in my body. So there is a reference to his loins, his sexual organs. Daniel 10:17 talks about breath there. That's in the wrong place, and I'm not sure why. Female reproductive organs, and I was running out of time. I didn't have a long time to look at this, but optimal female sexual response depends on a warm feeling of emotional closeness and intimacy with her partner. If this trust and intimacy are violated, there will be emotional trauma that can adversely affect female sexual health and response. And that's for years after. For years and years after. This is not an absolute all or nothing matter. There are many degrees of violation, ranging from just kind of a minor lack of proper tact and sensitivity in the male to outright rape and physical violation. These negative experiences will traumatize the woman to a greater or lesser degree, depending on their severity, provoking feelings of fear and anxiety, and further inhibiting sexual functioning and response. This is often called frigidity and closes down the woman's feelings and receptivity to orgasm. Many women have had to disconnect emotionally from their sexual organs and their functioning as the only way of coping with the sexual life or circumstances that are completely unsatisfying and uninspiring. So any kind of sexual mistreatment, especially in children, just has an ongoing effect. Now here's another reason that there is such a problem with a sense of closeness and intimacy in relationships in our culture. Losing a pregnancy brings an aura of great grief and sadness to the female organs, to the woman. Many women take a long time to heal emotionally from a miscarriage or an abortion, and post-abortion grief is probably the post-abortion grief and grief from incest are probably the two deepest types of grief that I've had to deal with in the work that I do. I am just enraged, literally, when I hear Planned Parenthood advocates, those who support abortion, saying it doesn't matter, and it relieves women of a problem. I would like for them one time to sit in my office and listen to a woman grieve that child. One time. It's a terrible thing. As an example, I used Genesis 31 and 2, the story of Jacob and Rachel. When she saw she was not bearing Jacob any children, she envied her sister. Now, the book of Jasher indicates that Rebekah and Leah were twins, which is kind of interesting. We don't get that from our scripture, but Jasher is a valid historical book and indicates that they were twins. I just cannot even imagine what it must have done to Rachel to, on her wedding day, being sent away and Leah put in her place. So I think Rachel's childbearing problems began back in there farther than just right there. And then there was envy. "Give me sons or I will die," she said to Jacob. Now listen to Jacob's response. Bless his heart. He's feeling helpless. He doesn't know what to do. So it came out as anger toward Rachel, and he said, "Am I in God's place who have held children from you?" So there was not a lot of understanding there, apparently. And so Rachel just had a lot of stuff going on there that kept her, I think, from bearing children. So, this is just a look at what our emotional responses to life can do inside of our bodies, just to give us a way to assess our angry responses or our bitter responses or our resentment responses and say, you know what, I really don't think I want what it's doing to me on the inside. You've all heard this statement, I think, that holding unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the person that you're not forgiving to die. Well, I think that can be true of bitterness and resentment and all of the things. When we hold those things within ourselves, we poison ourselves on a lot of different levels. So I went through some of the things that some things to listen for in our thinking and our talking. You've heard me talk a lot about the difference between a medicated brain and a renewed mind. That's I mentioned that in my first two books. According to the American Institute of Stress, 75 to 90% of visits to primary care physicians result from stress. I might argue that if we followed all of the illnesses to their original source, that we could say 100% of disease and illness comes either from the stress in our lives or from our wrong response to the stress in our lives, because I don't think it's possible to live stress-free. Research shows that around 87% of illnesses can be attributed to our thought life, only about 13% to diet, genetics, and environment. 87% of disease attributed to the way we think. When our thought life is not in agreement with the Word of God, emotions rage out of control, producing migraines, high blood pressure, irritable bowel, strokes, cancer, infections, allergic reactions. Oh, the list could go on. Studies also point to a direct correlation between anxiety and irregular heartbeat, and we read that just a little bit ago. Researchers have acknowledged for years that rage, depression, anxiety, and other negative emotions play a large part in producing physical health problems. The 21st century response is to develop pharmaceutical drugs aimed at trying to change the brain chemistry so that we'll feel better as quickly as possible. God's solution is 2 Corinthians 10:5, take thoughts captive, and Colossians 3:2, set our minds on heavenly things, Romans 12:1 and 2, renew our minds. So that long-term, permanent changes are made in the mind and, as a result, in our emotions and in our body. There is a vast difference between a medicated brain and a renewed mind. So some of the thoughts that we want to look at catching, I made a list here. Kind of interesting. I'm going to go down through this very negative list, which is just kind of ugly. But as I go down through this list, I want you to just think about how often you think or say, or maybe you've trained yourself not to anymore, and that's wonderful, but how many times you hear people think or say these very things. And then I'm going to go over a number of different types of thought patterns that drive these negative statements. I am such an idiot. I can't believe I was so stupid. He or she is such an idiot. I cannot believe they were so stupid. I can't stand this. It is too terrible. I should be able to handle this. Everybody else can. He or she makes me so mad. He or she is never there when I need him or her. So I should identify some of the emotions as that's self-pity. He or she makes me so mad is blame shifting. I cannot believe this is happening to me. Again, self-pity. My upbringing prevents me from loving or trusting people. Blame shifting. Life's just too hard and then you die. Hopelessness. Things never go right for me. Self-pity. Murphy's Law, if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. Awfulism, terribilism, that kind of thinking. People can't change. A leopard can't change its spots. People can't change. Hopelessness. I am a useless, no good, bad failure. Self-hatred. I'll never get another job. No one will ever want to hire me. I'm a terrible mom, dad, daughter, son, whatever role you fill. I am so worthless. Everyone is better than I am. I could never do that. There's nothing I can do about this situation. I'll never be any good at this. It's always my fault. Nobody likes me. I just can't cope. Why does everything always happen to me? I just heard that statement the other day. And I just said, okay, here's how I'm going to answer that. The only person everything happened to was Jesus. Everything happened to him. Everything does not happen to any of us or we'd be dead. We couldn't bear up under that. This is the worst thing that could have ever happened. When I was out mowing the other night, and I was getting pretty snarly. I was hot, my eyes were full of dirt, my hair was full of dirt. It was just a nasty, ugly, really bad day to be out there mowing, and I was thinking, oh, this is the worst day to mow. And then I was thinking, you know what, this is really not that bad. And I caught myself saying it, and I changed it because it was like, no. I mean, a lot of things. You've heard people say, this is the worst thing that could have happened, or this is the most awful thing that could ever happen. Oh, my goodness, no, not by any means. I'll never be able to learn this. I'm too stupid. The problems I'm having now will go on forever. Well, no, there's an end. There's an end. So, we've all heard those statements. We've all said them, some of them, at some point. The kinds of thinking that drive those kind of statements, I'm going to give you about probably a dozen. Black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking. When we think black and white, we tend to see ourselves and other people as either all wrong or all right, all good or all bad, all successful or all failure. There's just no gray in between for a black and white thinker. The reality is we're all in this learning continuum. Little at a time, we're growing. And so we may be doing some things now that 10 years from now, we look back at that and we'd say, wow, I wouldn't do it that way anymore. That doesn't mean when we did it back here that we're a really bad, terrible, awful person. It means we haven't grown up. But we want to keep moving forward. We want to keep growing so that 10 years from now, we're not going to be doing all the same things in the same old way. Overgeneralization. That's what drives things like, everything's always going to be just like this. I never do anything right. It's always like, never, always, are words that indicate black and white thinking and overgeneralization. I mentioned terribleism and awfulism, the kind of thinking that uses the words. It's like catastrophic thinking. It always assumes the worst is going to happen, and generally uses the words awful, terrible, can't stand it, this is going to kill me, or this just kills me. Oh, when he says that, it just kills me. And I'm like, no, it didn't. You're right here. It didn't kill you, and we need to change that expression because you make what this person said a fatal event, and it's not at all. So awfulism and terribleism just exaggerates things. Magnifying or minimizing binocular vision, where you look through one end of the binoculars and it brings everything right up here, or you look through the other end and it makes things look very distant and very far away. And people that have binocular vision tend to bring the terrible, awful, really bad stuff right up close, and everything that's good, they look through the other end of the binoculars and make it a million miles away. And so that's a very deadly way of looking. But people with binocular vision make mountains out of molehills and tend to minimize the strengths and qualities, the good things about ourselves and others, and maximize our weaknesses and our failures and theirs. Personalization and blame. When something happens to somebody else, we tend to take the responsibility for their choices and their situation on ourselves. I just hear all the time people saying, well, I just don't know what I did to make him treat me that way. Why do you think it's something you did? Well, it must be. You know, he wouldn't have talked to me that way if... No, the truth is he talked to you that way because he chose to. And you happen to be close. Jumping to conclusions and mind reading. Oh my goodness. Those are two that we just do a lot of. Jumping to a conclusion. Somebody does something and we immediately assume, because we're mind reading, that we know exactly why they did it and why they're going to do it again and how often they're going to do it, and on and on and on. Sometimes perhaps somebody may walk by and not acknowledge that we're there. And so then we personalize that. Well, I don't know what I did to make her ignore me like that, assuming that she's ignoring me when, you know, the truth is she had something pretty heavy on her mind, and she was headed for something, and she just absolutely did not see us sitting there. And there was nothing personal about it at all. And you know what? We need to ask. We need to say, I was sitting there and I saw you just go zipping right by, and I was tempted to be offended, but I thought, I wonder if something was bothering her. Is there something I can help with? And we will find a lot better response than if we just assume she was mad, so we become mad and then we don't talk to her, and it just all turns into this really big thing that was nothing at all to start with. Fortune telling usually follows mind reading. We begin to assume that we know exactly what the future is going to look like. Well, if that's the way she treated me here, then this is what she's going to do there. Or we start thinking things like, well, you know, I failed that test 2 times. There's just no point in ever taking it again because I know I'm going to fail it again. We've just foretold our future. Or, I'm not going to go apply for that job. Nobody's going to hire me anyway. You know, that kind of thing. Egocentric thinking. I was looking at that one, and what popped into my mind is politics. In egocentric thinking, politics and Facebook actually, we think it's important that we persuade others to think the same way we do. Other people need to agree with me. That's a pretty deadly way of thinking. Other people are not going to think the way we do, and even if we agree on some things, there are a lot of things that we all have room to disagree upon, and it's okay. Thinking that we have to control other people so that we feel safe, or believing that other people control us. That's a way of thinking that produces a lot of those statements that I made. No one can control anybody else unless we give them permission. And the way we give people permission is by believing that they make us angry or sad or whatever else word we want to put in there. Other people affect our emotions. There's no question about that. People can say things that make us feel offended, make us feel upset, angry, whatever it is, but we choose at that moment whether we're going to stay offended, upset, angry, frustrated, whatever it is. We get to choose. if we begin to believe that we're responsible for how other people feel. And that's usually the person that believes other people are responsible for their own anger or sorrow are also going to believe they themselves are responsible for everybody else's emotion. And that puts us in a position of having to fix everybody else's life. And we set ourselves up for failure very quickly there. We have grown up believing that we should be able to make things fair. How early do we start saying, that's not fair? The truth is that in a world that is broken by sin, nothing can ever be fair. Now we, as God's beloved children, given His authority, walking in that authority, learning to love others in a more unselfish way, we have the privilege of making things as just and right as many places as we can. We can increase justice in some places. But you know, I often think about this. I hear people say God is absolutely fair. And when I can, I say, no, that's not true. If He was fair, we'd be in hell. God is not fair. He is absolutely just. And because He's absolutely just, sin had to be paid for. And because we couldn't, He stepped in a situation that was incredibly unfair to Jesus and took our sins upon Himself. What an amazing thing. So we want to increase justice every place we can. We early we make unrealistic comparisons of ourselves with other people. We have to stop that. Because if we make comparisons, we either come out of that feeling very proud, or we come out of it feeling unworthy and no good. Comparisons are never good. We have to get rid of the comparisons. And we have to get rid of the should-isms and the must-isms. Okay? The awful-isms and the terrible-isms are deadly, and so are the should-isms and the must-isms. And they sound like this. Well, I should be able to drive an expensive car. He should be more polite to me. I should be better at sports. She should look where she's going. I should always look perfect when I go out. He should never interrupt me. I should have done better. I should be living in a better house by now. I should be earning more money. I should. Those are all expressions of expectations that may be met and may not be met the way we want them to be. Must-isms sound like this. I must never make a mistake. I must be able to cope with everything. Things must go well. And those go hand in hand with should-isms. And they also create a lot of turmoil in our thinking. Should-isms and must-isms create a lot of self-pity and a lot of resentment toward other people who appear to have a better life than we have, or who appear to have the life we wanted for ourselves. So those are just some areas of thinking that it's really important that we change them so that our internal health is better. And when our internal health is better, our external health is going to be better. Our medical system works hard at treating the presenting problem. For example, people that show up with chronic eczema, chronic rashes, chronic skin stuff. Those are clearly associated with thinking that creates something that's going on in the inside that shows up in our skin. It's a lot more trouble to find out what the thought problem is and the internal problem is. That's a lot harder than taking a pill or slapping on some salve of some kind. And I don't object to that. I mean, it can help decrease the symptoms so that we're a little more comfortable while we're searching out the problem, if we will go ahead and search out the problem. Arthritis, osteoporosis, has dietary stuff going on, but it also is associated with anger. The Bible, particularly in Proverbs, talks again and again about brittle bones in association with sorrow and anger. We need to watch our thought life. So I'm going to finish up with that.